ladies and gentlemen, Patrick Holford.
Thank you very much, Mads, and thank you, Eric Kroll, for bringing me here and being determined to do so. You cannot believe everything you read in Wikipedia. For example, it's not 36 books, it's 46. And it's now in 32 languages. There is something rotten in Denmark about mental health, and that's not me saying, it's Shakespeare. To see or not to see. I hope that you can stay a little bit longer, because I've been working with professors around the world on how to make sure that COVID-19 is a disease that nobody needs to die from. And if you can spare another 30 minutes, I'm going to do a presentation on this at the end. Here are just two facts that may interest you. Vitamin C is a hormone. That is, it's stored in the adrenal glands. There is 100 times more vitamin C in the adrenal glands than anywhere else in the body. And when the adrenal fight-flight system is stimulated, vitamin C is released and it raises blood levels 20 times. That's what the body does when it's under attack. It releases vitamin C. And if you cannot do that, and you have the cytokine storm of the last phase of COVID-19, then you're going to die. In China, the first randomized controlled trial giving ventilated patients in intensive care units either intravenous vitamin C or placebo is about to be published. We have a paper, and I brought a copy for you over here, that is also about to be published, a review on vitamin C and COVID, 131 studies. And in it you will see the results. This is the vitamin C group, this is mortality probability, and this is the placebo group. So what this is actually showing is that there was 68% less risk of death with vitamin C. That's what we call down here the hazard ratio. And not only that, but also when you measure inflammation in the blood, and in this context, IL-6, interleukin-6, is the one to measure. The level, the lower the better. The level in the vitamin C group is 19 versus 158 in the placebo group. We're really concerned about the level of oxygenation. And when you measure the oxygenation in the vitamin C group, this is after 7 days, it's 229 versus 151 in the placebo group. You probably are aware that the only, quote, proven treatment right now for COVID-19 is steroids. This was based on a study on dexamethasone. It's not the best steroid, but it's the one that was studied. And that showed a 3% reduction in risk. On the steroids, 23%, on the placebo, 26%. And this study, which is one of 131 studies in this review, is a 68% lower mortality in the most critically ill people in intensive care. That's the kind of thing that I want to tell you about. So I drew this cartoon. At first glance, you've got scurvy from a lack of vitamin C, but just in case, I'm going to test you for COVID. Because there is a very high percentage of people, especially in care homes, who the older you get, the more vitamin C you need, who therefore have overt vitamin C deficiency. We know in the UK 4% over 65, that is 480,000 people in Britain over the age of 65 have overt vitamin C deficiency at the level that causes scurvy. And if you are in that state and you get any flu, you're unlikely to survive. This is the paper, Vitamin C and Adjunctive Therapy for Respiratory Infection, Sepsis, COVID, with my eminent professors, Ian Whitaker in Wales, David Smith at Oxford University, Paul Marek, East Virginia Medical School in the US, and Nitra Carr in New Zealand. So we need to be clear that we already know how to make COVID-19 a non-fatal disease. I learnt what I learnt by being a student of the late Dr. Linus Pauling, twice Nobel Prize winner, 48 PhDs. When Einstein was asked, "Are you a genius?" he said, "If you want a real genius, it's this man, Linus Pauling." And I was studying psychology and schizophrenia, and he was the man who taught me that when you get optimum nutrition, which he called orthomolecular medicine, the right molecules. Do we have some orthomolecular medicine doctors here? Do we have some nutritionists here? Okay. And do we have some doctors here? No, we need more. We have to come back. Also, Eric said we're going to have an amazing party tonight, and if you haven't planned to come along, then please do, because we're now all in a bubble, and it's very good to interact with people. And he said that I have to write a song. So I've written a song. It's a drug rap. It's a rap song. And in the name of the farmer, it's a grand scam, big pharma man, you don't give a damn. So also, hopefully, at the end of this session, we have a chance to have a little rap. So really, I learned so much from Dr. Linus Pauling, and he learned originally from Dr. Abram Hoffer. Dr. Abram Hoffer was a research director of psychiatry in Canada, and the story goes like this. There was a psychiatrist from England called Dr. Humphrey Osmond, who had a theory that schizophrenics were going crazy because they were producing a hallucinogen inside their brain that was causing disperceptions. Everyone was into Freud. So he was completely ostracized. So he left England and went to live in Canada, and he met Dr. Abram Hoffer, a superb scientist. And they started to catalog the disperceptions. There's something called the Hoffer-Osmond Disperception Scale, HOD. And they started really to look at what is the experience of people who are labeled with schizophrenia. And because Abram Hoffer was in charge of the mental institutions, he had a chance to do research. And one of the things that he found was a lot of the disperceptions of hearing things, seeing things, strange distortions were actually very similar to the Native Americans when they took the sacred cactus, peyote. And they did some research on this, and they actually found a chemical that is always in the urine of the Native Americans when they take peyote, and is in 73% of schizophrenics' urine and in no normal people's urine. Just in case my jacket is hitting the antenna, I'll take it off. So he then worked out what the chemical was and reverse engineered the process and worked out that high dose of B vitamins, particularly niacin, could reverse the process. And then in the 50s, published the first ever double-blind placebo-controlled trial in the history of psychiatry. And when I was studying schizophrenia in the 70s, I came across this. So I went to meet this man. I thought I would be a psychotherapist, but I realized that psychotherapy is not very effective on schizophrenia. And I knew the drugs were chemical straitjackets. So I went to meet this man, and I said, "How many people have you treated?" And he said, "About 3,000. And I said, "What is your success rate?" And he said, 85% cure. And I said, "I've never seen a cured schizophrenic. What is your definition of cure?" And he said, "Free of symptoms, able to socialize with family and friends, and paying income tax." I'd never seen a schizophrenic paying income tax. So I said, I want to meet these people. So I did. I met a number of people formally diagnosed with schizophrenia who are absolutely fine. And I said, "Dr. Abram Hoffer, I have one more question. Can I be your student?" And a man came from Carmel in California with his son who was schizophrenic, who got better under Abram Hoffer's orthomolecular medicine treatment. And their father bought 50 copies of Abram Hoffer's book and took it back to Carmel and delivered one to every doctor in the county. And if you have the same impulse with mine, please feel free. And one of the doctors had invited to tea Dr. Linus Pauling. And Dr. Linus Pauling borrowed the book, and that's what made him spend the last 39 years of his career studying nothing but nutrition, and primarily vitamin C and its effects on viruses and cancer. And in the 1970s, he had proven that high-dose vitamin C can eradicate or severely shorten the duration and severity of any viral infection, including HIV, which I got a little bit sort of hung, drawn, and quartered for reporting on. So in the 90s, I wrote this book, Optimum Nutrition for the Mind. Maybe the 80s, actually. Yeah, no, about 2000, I think, yeah. Which now looks like this. It's the same book. There is a sort of later edition. So there was an early edition, but this is it. And we started the Food for the Brain Foundation, which is a charity. And at Food for the Brain, we wish to create a future where the importance of nutrition in optimizing mental health as a means of both prevention and treatment is understood by all and is implemented by many. And that's what I'm here to do. We have a wonderful board of trustees, Dr. Rona Tut. I met her. She's the head of the National Association of Head Teachers, now retired. She's called the past president, because she stays on, and she was the first head teacher chair from Special Educational Needs School. And she understands how important nutrition is. And the head of our scientific advisory board is Professor David Smith, Emeritus Professor of Pharmacology at Oxford University, and Vice Dean of Oxford Medical School. He's one of the authors of this paper. We have a clinic called the Brain Biocenter, where we treat people with mental health problems. And really, our speciality is not psychotherapy, it's not drugs, it's nutrition. Our job is to find out if there is a biochemical imbalance that can be corrected with nutrition. And then we will correct it. And that's what we do. And we treat people all over the world now, you know, with the Zoom consultations and so on. It's possible. And if you came to the Institute, we really want to look at the chemistry of your brain. And we want to understand if you have a blood sugar problem. We want to know if you are lacking in a mineral or have a toxic excess of an element like aluminium or mercury. We want to look at something called pyrols, which I'll talk about, zinc and B6 in the urine. We want to look at methylation, which is to do with B vitamins and homocysteine. We're going to talk about all of this. We want to look at histamine and vitamin C and other neurotransmitters and the amino acids they're made from. We'll talk about all this. And phospholipids and essential fats, and whether you have a food allergy or intolerance. That's what we do. I have on my own personal website, patrickholford.com, a questionnaire that anyone can fill out. And over 100,000 people have done this. So when we look at all of the questions, we can actually understand that 82% say they become quickly impatient, 80% low energy, less than it used to be, feel I have too much to do, anxious and tense, PMS, PMT, anger, depression, concentration problems, hyperactive, memory, learning problems. So we can say modern man is not a naked ape, but a knackered ape. Knackered means exhausted, worn out, not functioning right. And actually, we have known for a long time, all the way back to 2001, the World Health Organization says the biggest single problem in the world is the growing level of mental illness. And last month in the UK, COVID-19 deaths didn't even make the top 10. Number one was dementia deaths. It's a massive problem all over the world. 1 in 6 children, by the way, some of my sort of country statistics are the UK. I'm sure it's not so different in Denmark, but I don't have access to it. 1 in 6 children are classified as special educational needs. 1 in 8 have mental health conditions. 1 in 100 have autism. 7 out of 10 people with autism also have another condition like anxiety, depression, hyperactivity. There's been a very significant increase in these conditions occurring together. Coexistence is becoming the norm. Teenage depression and self-harm is rising, and even more so during these lockdown days. Suicide rates are really up a lot. Teenage suicide in London has increased by 4 times the national rate, more than doubling from 2013 to 2016. and probably doubling again since then. By the way, in traditional tribes, there's a very good book called Tribe. You might want to read it. But in traditional tribes, like Native American tribes, suicide is unheard of. It does not occur. It is really, we are living in a way that is not communal. And in a proper community, you wouldn't be doing this. It's a new phenomenon. Antidepressant prescriptions just go up and up and up every year. In 2017, 1 in 6 people in the UK were prescribed antidepressants, 70,000 of which were for people under the age of 18. In 2018, 53 million antidepressants prescribed. And I'm sure 2020 will be a record year. We already know that in studies comparing antidepressants, serotonin reuptake inhibitors, like your Lustril, Zeroxat, paroxetine, etc., to placebo, there's at least double the number of suicides and double the rate of suicidal ideation. So we have a drug to treat depression, which actually doubles the risk of suicide. I mean, and how effective are these drugs? The best studies in the world, this is one of the best studies in the Journal of American Medical Association. The magnitude of benefit of medication compared with placebo may be minimal or non-existent on average in patients with mild or moderate symptoms. And also in the UK now, 4 million, we have 4 million long-term antidepressant users who cannot get off them because the withdrawal effects are so severe. So there's a narrow line between the word, withdrawal effects or cessation effects and actually addiction. And this is a very, very serious problem. If you look at all the violent deaths in the world, there's actually more from suicide than all wars, murders combined. That is the state of Homo sapiens. We have become a nation of pill poppers. Taking psychiatric drugs, we're still being prescribed benzodiazepines, tranquilizers, which addict you in under 4 weeks, and they're being prescribed for longer than that. Antidepressants, antipsychotic drugs, which very cleverly turned into mood stabilizers. People used to be diagnosed with depression, and now they're diagnosed with bipolar. A lot of people who are bipolar, if I was depressed, and I was asked, what do you do when you're not depressed? The answer is, I get up at 5 in the morning and I write books. They say, you're definitely bipolar. Yeah? And the point is, if I can be turned from depression to bipolar, I can be prescribed 2 drugs, both an antidepressant and a mood stabilizer. You double your market, you double your money. That's what's happening. Stimulant drugs for children. Doctors deny these drugs harm and they do not support withdrawal. Yes, doctor, I seem to have become addicted to prescribing drugs. IQ is falling at a rate of about 7% a generation. This is Swedish research. Dementia, 3 in 10 over 70 have impaired memory, 80% of which will develop dementia within 5 years. 790 people, 9 double-decker buses worth of people are diagnosed with dementia every day in the UK. Over 50 million worldwide have dementia. It's expected to double every 20 years to 135 million by 2050. The current cost is 604 billion a year, 1% of GDP. And yet we go back 5 years into the Lancet Medical Journal, and there's a very nice article that says nutritional medicine should now be considered as a mainstream element of psychiatric practice, with research, education, policy, and health promotion supporting this new framework. Is it? No. Nothing has been done. And really what's happening is no one is thinking about the brain. No one is really aware of what it is that made us Homo sapiens in the first place. Because really it is the evolution of our brain that makes us Homo sapiens. That is our USP, is the nature of our brain. And the very, very first rudimentary eye cell or nerve cell, dinoflagellate, probably, over 1.5 million years ago. Developed the ability. Before then, we had organisms and plants able to turn sunlight into energy, photosynthesis. And then this is the first organisms that use the omega-3 fat DHA, docosahexaenoic acid, with 6 double bonds in a horseshoe shape that is able to convert sunlight, photons, into nerve power. The first twitch. The DHA is really concentrated in your eye, turning light into a nerve signal. That is the beginning of the brain. It's a semiconductor. And we became sapiens by being a waterside or aquatic ape. We didn't drop out of the trees and stand up and go hunting with spears. It's crazy. I run safaris in Kenya. The very last thing you ever want to do if you want to catch an animal is to stand up. All the best hunters are fantastic crawlers and fantastic sprinters. We are lousy crawlers, lousy sprinters. It didn't happen like that. It's a total myth. What happened was we started to exploit wetlands and swamplands and the water's edge and the estuaries, because that's where the rich food was. That's where you could eat all the mussels and the periwinkles and the oysters and the crabs and so on. And we had a diet that was abundant in omega-3 DHA and B12 and phospholipids and selenium and zinc and other nutrients. And as Darwin realized towards the end of his life, he said the conditions of existence are really important. It's not just about your genes. It's actually about the conditions of existence, what your genes are exposed to. And that's kind of where science went wrong. We didn't realize the importance of the conditions of existence. Now we call this epigenetics. Our brain size has shrunk. 10,000 years ago, our brain was 1.49 kg. And now it's 1.35 kg. So we are losing our brain size, we are losing our intelligence, we are losing our mental health. And for all the tragedies that may occur with global warming and overpopulation and misuse of resources and inability to deal with microorganism infections, the one thing we haven't factored in is the decreasing intelligence. Our humanity is our connection. It is our intelligence. And we can see that in our politicians making bad choices. You know, I'm not against vaccines. I just wish there was a vaccine against stupidity. So we found that niche in the wetlands. We became upright, wading in water. We started to develop manual dexterity, opening shells. We developed a layer of insulating fat, which all sea mammals have. For many of us, it's become too big. You look generally very trim in this room. It's good. Babies are born with the vernix, the waxy waterproof layer, that is only found in sea mammals. It is identical to that of a sea lion and a seal, but is not found on any land-based mammal. Ear, nose, and throat specialists can look in your ear and say, "You're a diver, aren't you?" Because the more time you spend in the ocean, there is a bony protrusion in the ear called the extosis, which comes out and protects the ear when you do a lot of diving. We have this. So the dolphin's extoses has completely blocked. They cannot hear, but they can dive. So they've had to develop sonar. And the longer you spend in the water, the more this occurs. There is ample proof that this is how we became Homo sapiens. The Moken, or the Baju, the sea nomads in Indonesia, spend up to 5 hours a day in the water. They give birth in water. Their first weaning food is seaweed. And they can hold their breath for as long as a dolphin. They were moving in that direction. We were moving in the direction of the richest source of food, like the dolphin left the land, settled in the sea. A dolphin has every bone that you have in your hands and your arms within its flippers, shrunk. We became Homo aquaticus, and from that, Homo sapiens, and now Homo fatiens, and also Homo caffeans, and Homo appians. That is where we are heading.
Hi, my name is Eddie Mullen. I'm 26 from Northern Ireland, and 3 years ago I was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. I was really suspicious and paranoid of other people, to the point where I couldn't work any longer. I couldn't interact with my family and friends at all. I became really socially withdrawn. My quality of life was just at the bottom. I couldn't do anything that I wanted to do, and therefore it put me on a lot of psychiatric medication, like aripiprazole, the antipsychotic, escitalopram, the antidepressant, and also buspirone for anti-anxiety, and diazepam, sleeping medication, and some medications that were to treat the side effects of the medication, like procyclidine. I was on that as well for muscle rigidity. And none of these drugs actually worked for me in any way. I felt worse. I was more anxious. I was more physically ill. I put on a lot of weight. I put on about 10 stone in the period of a year and a half. And then whenever I came across Patrick's work, I started to adapt my lifestyle accordingly. I took an interest in nutrition. I bettered my diet and bettered my lifestyle, and I'm now medication free. I have a really, really good quality of life now. I lost in the last 14 months about 8 stone, and I'm now doing a business course to try and help me set up exercise classes so that I can help other people in the same situation as me. And a lot of that is down to understanding better what way nutrition affects both my body and my brain, and not being on the medication that was affecting me so negatively. And I just have been given a new lease of life, and I'm really, really thankful for that.
So, we are psychological beings with our thoughts and our feelings, and we are chemical beings. Every thought and feeling has a chemical reaction, our whole biochemistry. This is the domain of nutrition and also pharmacology. We're physical beings. You cannot separate these. You know, if you're very, very stressed, your muscles are tight. You go down the bar and you drink a few beers, which is chemistry, and that relaxes you, reduces adrenaline for a while, and then you get an increase in adrenaline, then you get into a fight, which is physical. So you cannot separate these. They're always interacting. And by the way, the space in the middle, that is the space for energy. When Einstein said E equals mc squared, energy equals mass times the speed of light, you know, we are all energy. So if you could say that, so spiritual, energetic part of medicine would be there. If I was starting new and had the energy for it, I would probably not start the Institute for Optimum Nutrition, but start the Integral Medicine Institute, the Integral Medicine Institute, where there would be a module on nutrition, which is this, and a module on physical therapy, which is this, and a module on psychological therapy, which is this, and a module on energetic medicine, which is this, and then a module on environmental medicine. Not integrative, but integral, because you cannot separate these things. But I'm here to talk about nutrition. If you want to get murdered, go and live in Bulgaria or Hungary. This is World Health Organization data looking at the intake of seafood versus the rate of homicide or murder, with an incredibly high correlation. So the countries that have very little seafood have very high murder rate, and up here, Japan, Hong Kong, Portugal, Korea, Norway, lots of seafood, very little murders. So that's an example of the psychological. If we look at the chemical, I'm going to talk more about each of these. The amino acid from our protein, tryptophan, turns into 5-hydroxytryptophan, turns into serotonin. Serotonin crosses the gap from one neuron to the next, docking onto the receptor site, and improves your mood. So this is, really our sort of chemical. That's an example of it. I'm going to be showing you a study where through the use of B vitamins in people with pre-Alzheimer's, pre-dementia, mild cognitive impairment, there is a 9-fold decrease in the rate of shrinkage of the Alzheimer's areas of the brain in 1 year compared to placebo. So we can say that is a physical change. We are psycho-immuno-endo-neurology. It all interacts. But there's more, because also when we look at the gut, and we start to understand the interaction of gliadorphins from gliadin, from gluten, from wheat, for example, and caseomorphins from dairy products, and how they interact with the gut, you realize that the gut is terribly important, as is inflammation for our health. So really, we want gastro, immuno, endo, neuro psychology. And the general conception of nutrition originally was you're a car that has a tank. It needs petrol, which is sugar, and it needs oil. It needs a certain amount of vitamin C to prevent scurvy, and B3 to prevent pellagra. That was the original concept. And this also is based on the idea that the enzymes that turn one thing into another have a cofactor that makes the key fit the lock, and the cofactor is a vitamin, a mineral, a substance from your diet. But then we started to understand about genetics. And actually, the ability to read genetic information depends upon methylation, which depends upon B vitamins. So we start to realize that there is a field of epigenetics, the impact of nutrition on our genes. Now we have telomeres. At the end of the spirally chromosome, there is a section called the telomere, and every time you make a new cell, it's like a photocopy of a photocopy. And gradually you lose telomere length. And when you run out of telomere length, you die. So the best way to predict when someone is going to die is the length of their telomeres. So there's a lot of research, and Nobel Prizes being won on the research on what lengthens and shortens telomeres. For example, omega-3. The more omega-3, longer your telomeres. More B vitamins, longer your telomeres. More nuts and seeds, the longer your telomeres. So yes, more vitamin D, the longer your telomeres. Meditation, meditators, and people who exercise have longer telomeres. So really, nutrition is intellogenetic. It's very deep in everything. And even as nutritionists, I guarantee it happens to me every year. I underestimate the true power of nutrition. It is extraordinary. The model that I'm using really in thinking about mental illness is that you have your environment. So a person may have a lack of B vitamins or omega-3, an excess of sugar or stimulants like coffee, or perhaps drugs, whether prescribed or recreational. And gradually they're losing their adaptive capacity. That's the environment side of things. Then you have the genes, because it's your genes that interact with your environment. And as we're going to learn, you can be born with high histamine. This is a particular genetic factor I'll talk about, very relevant in schizophrenia. You can be born with a lack of dopamine receptors, which is called reward deficiency syndrome, terribly common in drug addicts and alcoholics. But what is the psychological equivalent of your environment? And what is the psychological equivalent of your genes? And I call the psychological equivalent of your genes your mind frame, the way you see the world, which comes through all the negative behavior patterns that we inherit from our parents. So the belief, I am a failure, I'm not good enough. It changes how we see things. And for your life, what is the psychological equivalent of your environment? The answer is it's your sense input, everything you see, hear, smell, etc. So in a way, if you're having a hard time with your boyfriend, you've got two choices. You either get a new prescription of your glasses and see your boyfriend in a new way, you change your mind frame, or you change your sense input and get a new boyfriend. And it's the combination of these four factors that leads somebody from mood swings to depression to schizophrenia or learning difficulties to ADHD to autism. So there are three essential brain makers. First are the essential fats. Of the structural fat in your brain, 98% is omega-3. And the omega-3s have to bind to phospholipids. This is all the introduction. By the way, I forgot to say, any slide that has a dot on it is in your manual. So you go, oh, that's really interesting. You don't have to write it down because you'll find it in here. And at the moment, we're sort of going through sequence. But because we've changed the order of what we're teaching, this will go out of sequence. So, for example, the section on kids and the section on schizophrenia is towards the end of this manual. But also, I've given the organizers a PDF of all the slides, right? So you can have that. So to some extent, it's good just to engage in a conversation. But what I do often, if you're following along or not, and you have a question, is just write down Q, just a quick note, because the chances are I will answer it in the next 2 or 3 slides. So it's better if we do questions at the end of each section. And with the books and the manual and the PDF and so on, you can consolidate all this learning and get the most use out of the day. We put the phospholipids and the omegas together by methylation, which I'm going to talk about, which is B vitamins. Those are the 3 essential brain makers. The dry weight of the brain is 60% if you take out the water. But the structural fat is mainly omega-3. Here we have a phospholipid. They always have strange names like phosphatidylcholine. And choline is very rich in eggs and fish. And it is not only part of the structure of the brain, these blobby things here are phospholipids, and attached to them are the omega-3s. So it's part of our structure. But also this particular phospholipid choline makes a neurotransmitter called acetylcholine, which helps communication in the brain and is vital for memory and cognition. We're going to talk about these. We're going to talk about omega-3s. One is told that modern medicine is evidence-based medicine, which means you have randomized controlled trials, and you have lots of them. So you can pull them together to have a meta-analysis of randomized controlled trials, which show that omega-3 is effective for depression, both for major and minor depression. So if our doctors were doing evidence-based medicine, they would be prescribing omega-3 over antidepressants because they are more effective and they have less side effects. We'll talk about this. As you know, there are 2 kinds of fats, omega-6 and omega-3. Omega-3 is usually in the seeds and in hot climate, like sesame seeds, sunflower seeds. Omega-3 in the plant kingdom is more in the leaves and is in a colder climate. So actually chia and flax are more omega-3. Pumpkin, if it's grown in a cold climate, more omega-6, and in a hot climate, more omega-6, cold climate, more omega-3. The plant omega-3, I have a book, I realize it's not in here, called Optimum Nutrition for Vegans, which is coming out in about 2 weeks. Well, officially in December, but we have some copies in 2 weeks. The conversion of the vegan alpha-linolenic acid into EPA and DHA. It's DHA that builds the brain. The EPA is an anti-inflammatory. The conversion is very small, 5%. It's very, very low. And really what you need is a direct source of DHA, which can be made from algae if you are vegan. And we know this, we learnt about it because the Eskimos have the highest intake of cholesterol and the highest intake of saturated fat and no heart disease. And it turned out the reason was the cold water plankton was rich in alpha-linolenic acid. The little fish would eat it, like the sardines. And then the little fish will get eaten by the fish with teeth, the salmon and the mackerel. So they're really, really high in these. And then the seals would eat the fish with teeth. So seal oil is the best source of this. And that's what the Inuit, the Eskimos, were living off. That's what was protecting them. Healthy mind and a healthy heart. And as a consequence, we learned if you want to be healthy, you need to eat Eskimos. If you feed pregnant rats halfway through their pregnancy with more phosphatidylcholine, their babies are born with way more connections, and they have better memory recall and improved learning ability. If you give students a single high dose of phosphatidylcholine 90 minutes before an exam, they actually function better. A lot of women in pregnancy who are feeding 2 people, themselves and the fetus, run out of these nutrients. And as a consequence, their brain size actually shrinks. the fetus will rob the mother's brain to build its own. It's a case of, mummy, I shrank your brain. And that's why many pregnant women say, I felt really dippy and forgetful. I felt like I had half a brain, because they don't have enough nutrition. You need more. And we'll learn that the lower your homocysteine, the better your ability to make phospholipids. Homocysteine is to do with B vitamins. I'm going to explain. We're still just on the introduction. So methylation is a process. There's 1 billion methylation reactions every 2 seconds. It builds the brain by adding the omega-3 to the phospholipids. It's a little bit like, to make cement, to make concrete, you need, both the cement and the, we call it ballast, or 20 to dust, and the water, and then you make cement. You need omega-3 and phospholipids. It's done by methylation. The turning of genes on or off. If a woman has the BRCA gene, they have roughly a 50% chance of getting breast cancer, but that means that 50% don't. And we know that soya actually dampens down the BRCA gene, while dairy products actually crank it up. That is epigenetics. That up-down control is done by methylation. DNA repair is done by methylation. If you're not doing methylation, your blood level of homocysteine goes up, which I will explain. And methylation requires certain B vitamins, zinc, trimethylglycine. We're going to go into all of this in detail. So for almost every disease, major chronic disease, but here I'm looking at Alzheimer's, we know that too much sugar, a high GL diet, generates advanced glycation end products, AGEs, which damage the brain. Lack of omega-3 and phospholipids damage the brain, raises homocysteine. A lack of antioxidants, excess oxidants like smoking, damages the brain, raises homocysteine. Lack of B vitamins raises homocysteine. Homocysteine means you can't do methylation, which damages the brain. It creates a toxic compound called NMDA that damages neurons. And it damages the arteries, so you get poor supply, which damages the brain. So, it's your blood sugar, your antioxidants, your B vitamins, and your essential fats. If you get those 4 things right, the chances of getting sick are very small. Many years ago, in one of my first ever students on the Institute for Optimum Nutrition course, which Linus Pauling is the patron of our institute, was a schoolmaster of a secondary school. And we designed an experiment where we took 90 school children and put a third onto high-dose vitamin mineral. We didn't know about essential fats in those days. And a third onto placebo and a third onto nothing. We measured their IQ, the non-verbal IQ. And this, by the way, we thought was very controversial. So we hired a professor who thought we were crazy. The idea of giving vitamins and minerals and raising your IQ, crazy. So he said, you are the right man for the job. So he ran the study. His name is Professor David Benton. And Gwilym Roberts is the headmaster. And this was published in the Lancet Medical Journal and filmed by BBC Horizon. We got a 10-point increase in the IQ score after 7 months of the children on the vitamins, and a 3-point difference on the placebo. So a 7-point difference. That is the same gain that we are losing every generation currently. And since then, there have been lots of other studies. Some have been more effective than others, but most of them have lowered the dose to the RDA level, or I think it's now called the RNI. RDA was the recommended daily allowance, or stands for the ridiculous dietary arbitrary. A consensus of idiots. It's not really the optimum level. The brain talkers are the neurotransmitters, serotonin, adrenaline, mainly made from amino acids. And the fuel, that is either glucose or ketones made in the liver from fat. If you give a neuron the choice of glucose as fuel or ketone as fuel, they prefer ketones. All mammals are born skinny and have to stand up quickly. Except for us humans, we're born fat and we really can't do anything. 75% of all the energy we consume from breast milk goes to building the brain. In the early moments of life, in the early weeks, we are making 1 million connections a second. And the primary fuel is ketones, not glucose, from the fat stores that the baby has. Milk is high in fat. So ketones were an essential part of the ability to rapidly build the brain. Antioxidants, if you like, are the exhaust fume protectors from generating energy in the brain and elsewhere. So if you go close up and you have a neurotransmitter like serotonin that is going to cross the gap and dock onto a receptor site, and the receptor site is embedded in this field of phospholipids attached to omegas, primarily omega-3. And that's the way it works. And then it's recycled back up through the reuptake channel. Prozac is a serotonin reuptake inhibitor. It blocks the recycling, so you become more and more deficient in serotonin. What happens during addictive use is the brain shuts down production and reception of neurotransmitters. For example, here we see the opiate receptor. So if you go for a run, you produce endorphins. If you have sex, you produce endorphins. They dock onto the opioid receptor, make you feel really good. Well, if you discover heroin, you know, you don't need the sex, you don't need the exercise, because you have an opioid that directly locks onto the endorphin, makes you feel fantastic. But what happens is the brain will shut down its production of endorphins and become dependent on the addictive substance. That is the basis of addiction. We're going to talk about that in the last section. Because we have now 100,000 people who've done our online questionnaire at my website, patrickholford.com, the 100% health check, we can ask questions like, what is your chance of being in good health? 100%. Above 80% we say is green, good health, and below 50% is bad. And what we see is the more sugar a person eats, the lower is their chance of being in optimum health. And the more sugar a person eats, the higher is their chance of being in poor health. And we see the same, salt has the same pattern as well. We'll talk more about that. When you have your croissant in the morning, up goes your blood sugar. Your body produces insulin. Insulin is the fat-storing hormone. It's going to take that sugar to your cells to give you a burst of energy, and what you don't need is take it into storage as fat. And then your blood sugar goes down. And if it goes down a long way, like a rebound hypoglycemia, you then produce adrenal hormones. So animals eat, and their blood sugar goes up, and then they hang around doing nothing, and when their blood sugar gets really low, they produce adrenal hormones and go hunting. So when you have the blood sugar dip, you go hunting for sugar. And that's the way it works. And some of us use caffeine and stress to give ourselves some energy. And in the end, we end up with what I call internal global warming, and that is called metabolic syndrome. And all of these problems, which the average doctor is seeing every day, are the consequence of internal global warming, metabolic syndrome, losing your blood sugar control, increased inflammation, raised homocysteine, same pattern. But of course, we're given a drug for the cholesterol, and a drug for the blood pressure, and a drug for the diabetes, and a drug for the pain, and a drug for the mood, and a drug, it's fantastic business for the pharmaceutical industry, but lousy medicine. What are the basic essentials? A low sugar, low glycemic load diet, but not a low-fat diet. Sufficient omega-3, especially DHA. Sufficient B vitamins, especially B12. We'll talk about all this. A whole food, Mediterranean-style marine food diet, rich in micronutrients, including selenium, iodine, other essential minerals, avoiding technology addiction, and a lifestyle that enhances natural connection. So that's the end of the introduction, and now we're going to move quickly into depression. I have a book called The Feel Good Factor, and it has 10 proven ways to boost your mood, and we're going to go through most of these. If you are diagnosed with clinical depression, usually you fill out a questionnaire called the Hamilton Rating Scale, which is just a questionnaire which asks you questions like, do you have trouble falling asleep? Is your appetite poor? Are you gaining weight? Do you feel unattractive and unlovable? And all these kind of things. And if you look at these questions, I'm sure all of us would answer at least yes to, 1 or 2 or whatever. And if you answer yes to enough, then you are clinically depressed. This is what clinical depression is. The reason I'm showing you this is because I'm going to show you studies and their effects on the Hamilton rating scale, so we can compare the effect of omega-3 versus antidepressants. What's happening is that we have two modes of operation. One is our normal activity, and then there is the stress mode, the fight-flight mode, when you need to run like hell because you're being chased by a tiger, fight or flight. And that's our adrenal system. And what's happening now is we're triggering our adrenal system, all the time with this COVID thing. I was WhatsApping with a friend of mine in America and said, how's the election going on? And she said, it's exactly the same as COVID. Long stretches of boredom with the occasional flash of fear. And that's, that fight-flight syndrome. Excuse me if I occasionally sound sexist. My wife says, excuse him, he's in his 60s, But, the male is more designed to hunt. There's a very good book called Why Men Can't Listen and Women Can't Read Maps. It's really interesting, written by a husband and wife, sociologist, anthropologist. It's very good. And a man's language is much shorter. It's, hi, Fred, I'll meet you in the bar at 6 o'clock. It's the language of hunters who said, lion, to the left, 200 yards, stay still, whatever it is. The women have much better social linguistic skills. I go to a party, and I say, I met Fred, he's very nice, he's an economist or something, and my wife says, those two aren't getting on, she's gay, he fancies her, and, she picks up all this social information. So it's known with estate agents that men can read can get a sense of a 3D building from a flat plan, but on the whole, women can't. So they need a model if you actually see the thing. And of course, we're all different. Some men are more feminine and women more masculine. But basically, hunting, we don't hunt for buffalo, we hunt for money now. We want the fast car and the latest computer and all that stuff. And gathering, well, what is gathering? Since the very beginning of evolutionary anthropology, women have always had bags in which to gather the nuts and the berries and the seeds and the herbs. It's bags. It's almost impossible for a woman to leave home without a bag. Is there any woman who came here without a bag? Yeah, okay. It's very rare. I went down Oxford Street and I found that the most expensive bag was £10,000. Why would you spend that? You don't have £10,000 in your handbag, or even 5,000 or 1,000. It's like top shopper. We're more a product of our evolution than we realize. Triggering this adrenal system. I'll talk more about that because it's very key to addiction. So this is a heat map that we've done from our survey of 100,000 people. And what we can see is in relation to mind and mood, the foods that most predict poor memory, poor mood, sugar, salt, refined foods, caffeinated drinks, wheat, and then down the bottom, the ones that predict the best mind and mood, the most nuts and seeds, fruit, veg, oily fish, and so on. So we get a sort of sense of what's going on. We know that this metabolic syndrome, where you have faulty blood sugar, like raised HbA1c, glycosylated hemoglobin, or raised insulin resistance, or increased waist to hip circumference, or high blood fats, triglycerides. If you're not depressed, but you've got metabolic syndrome, you will be depressed soon, says the research. If you are depressed and you don't have metabolic syndrome, you'll have metabolic syndrome soon. Major depression is a predictor of metabolic syndrome. And, metabolic syndrome in children predicts depression in adults. So, there's this very strong link with the blood sugar. And I'm not going to spend much time on this, but in case you don't know, a lot of the keto diets are a bit old-fashioned in a sense because they just say don't eat more than 30 grams or 50 grams of carbohydrate. But you can eat 50 grams of good carbs, you can eat 50 grams of bad carbs. So as nutritionists, you know about the glycemic index, where you measure the effect of a particular sugar on your blood sugar. And if the glycemic index is high, it means it's a fast-releasing sugar. Like bananas is fast sugar, berries is slow sugar. But if you eat a lot of berries, you're going to get a big blood sugar effect. So you have to know both the speed of the release, which is the glycemic index, or the quality, and the quantity that you are eating, which is the grams of available carbs. And it's multiplying the quality by the quantity, which is what's called the glycemic load. So in all of my books, I say if you want to lose weight, you eat 40 GLs a day or 60 to maintain your weight. You always have protein with carbohydrate. If you eat a piece of fruit, carbs. With some nuts, protein. It will slow down the release of the sugars in the food. So don't have toast and jam, but if you had toast and peanut butter, sugar-free, for example, it will slow down the release of the sugars. And graze rather than gorge. In this context, by having 3 meals and 2 snacks, you're keeping your blood sugar even, you release less insulin. I know that we could talk about 18-6, and we can talk about eating 1 meal a day, and we can talk about, 5-2 diet and all the rest of it. We probably won't have time because we're focusing on mental health. But generally, this is how you stabilize your blood sugar. And this is in my book. So a simple way is that half of what you eat is vegetables. So if you have a main meal and half of the plate is vegetables, that's about 3 GLs. You've got a 10 GL a day for a main meal, a 5 GL for a snack. And a quarter is protein, the amount of meat or fish that would fit in the palm of your hand, or a bit more if you're eating beans, if you're vegetarian. And a quarter are the carbs. This is your potatoes or rice or pasta or starchy, carrots or parsnips or something. And I'm a great fan of oatcakes because they release their sugar very slowly, so I eat probably more oatcakes than bread. And I have a number of books that talk about this low GL way of eating. Now, so blood sugar, number one, mood, absolutely fundamental. For all mental health, fundamental. Now, here's an interesting thing. If you go back 20 years, the average person who was depressed was an older woman who would eat like a sparrow, so poor appetite, very poor sleeper, waking early, and with a sort of depressive, low, pessimistic mood. Nowadays, what's called atypical depression has actually become typical. Atypical depression is almost the opposite, in the sense that somebody with atypical depression could sleep forever. They feel sleepy and groggy in the day. They crave carbohydrates. They're probably overweight. And they don't have a permanent low mood, but they're very sensitive. So if somebody criticizes them, they can go into a pit of, depression, sort of kind of self-pity in a way, I'm no good, etc. So very mood reactive. And that probably now is half of all depression, and it's occurring still 3 times more common in women than men. It's said that women take things inwards, depression, and men outwards, aggression. But, I always like to say, depression is just anger without enthusiasm. Don't get sad, get mad. So if you're getting depressed about COVID, I get every week, I get it on Friday night, I got it last night, the deaths in all the intensive care units, and nothing's happening. It's just very, very, very tiny. Across the whole of the UK last week, it's about 200 deaths in all the intensive care units from COVID. The average at this time of year of deaths, by the way, in the UK is 10,000 a week, okay? So, if you're getting depressed by all this, oppressive talk and masks and everything else, get out and bang your drum, let it out. Depression is anger without enthusiasm, Anyway, what happened was a psychiatrist, a professor of psychoanalysis, Professor Malcolm McLeod in North Virginia Medical School, Chapel Hill, had been treating for many years a young man who was depressed. And one day his client came in and said, I'm not depressed. I've been taking these pills from the health food shop. I'm not depressed. Anyway, he set up a double-blind controlled trial because he found that it was chromium that was stopping his depression. So he took people with atypical depression and gave them either chromium, 600 micrograms, the average pill is 200 micrograms, or placebo, and measured the Hamilton rating scale. sometimes called HAM-D. And there was a 66% drop in the score in those on the chromium, but not the placebo. And remission, in other words, 6 out of 10 were no longer depressed at the end of the, I think it was 8-week study. But the thing about chromium is if it's going to work in 3 days. So never mind tests, you can give somebody chromium, 600 microgram, not 1 pill, but 3, maybe 2 with breakfast, 1 with lunch, or if you want to spread it out, you can, and see what happens. So I had a health journalist, editor of a national newspaper, ring me up the other day, and she said, I'm not ringing for a quote, I'm not ringing for an interview, I just ringing to say thank you. And I said, why? And she said, well, I didn't tell you when we spoke last time, but I've been depressed for the last 4 months, and you told me what to do, and I took the pill, and I came out of my depression in 45 minutes, and never been back. So if chromium works, it works very fast. Doesn't work for everyone, but if you have a client with atypical depression, it may well work. And there are other studies showing mood improvements, one giving chromium to women with premenstrual mood disorders, another with women prone to binging. The second found greater reductions in binging in weight and depression. Chromium, the nutritionist will know, is essential for insulin reception. So there's an awful lot going on in the space of insulin. So once again, we have the neurotransmitter, the communicator, crossing the gap and delivering its message from one neuron to another. And those are the talkers in our brain. And the two main talkers in relation to depression. Depression generally has 2 attributes. One is the black hole. You know, what's the point? I don't see the point of life. I might as well kill myself. You know, what is the point? The dark hole. And that is most connected to a lack of serotonin. And there is a drug that raises serotonin very effectively for about 6 hours. It's called MDMA, ecstasy. It's not available on the National Health Service. And if someone takes this drug, they cannot eat. Because when your serotonin is high, you have no appetite. And when your serotonin is low, you can't stop eating. So depression with craving for carbohydrate, you know, is a possible indicator of serotonin lack. The other attribute of depression is apathy. I know if I just got out of bed and went for a run and ate some healthy food and, you know, but your get up and go has got up and gone. And that's connected with dopamine, noradrenaline, and adrenaline. These are the 3 stimulating neurotransmitters made directly from tyrosine, while serotonin is made directly from 5-HTP. All these ones in the middle are to do with methylation, which we'll talk about. And down here we have the omega-3s, which sensitize the receptors for these neurotransmitters. So here's a colleague of mine at Oxford University, and he took a group of 15 women and gave them a diet with everything in it except for tryptophan. And within 8 hours, 10 of the women are starting to feel depressed. That's how quickly it works in the brain. No tryptophan, no serotonin, no mood. And then when he put the tryptophan back in, their mood improved. So the first class of antidepressants, when you make something, you break it down. You know, everyone says if you take vitamins, you just make expensive urine. Well, actually, you're meant to excrete some. That's the way it goes. When you take in ascorbic acid, vitamin C, when it gets spent, it becomes, when it's lost its antioxidant power, it becomes dihydroascorbic acid, which is excreted. It's spent. So yes, when you take in vitamins, you seem to make expensive urine, but it's spent. And the way we break down neurotransmitters, serotonin is made from one amino acid, tryptophan. So it's a monoamine. And there's an enzyme called a monoamine oxidase. It oxidizes or breaks down serotonin. And if you inhibit it, monoamine oxidase inhibitor, which are the drugs Nardil, Parstelin, it's a good antidepressant because it makes more serotonin in the gap. It has a slightly unfortunate side effect, which is death, which can occur if you have it with alcohol or yeast. But in truth, it got taken off the market when its 15-year patent runs out. When the patent runs, you can only patent something that's invented. You cannot patent tryptophan or B3 because nature, it's already there. So you have to invent something new that blocks something like this drug. Then you get 15 years that you can make lots of money because you have a monopoly and you can charge a fortune. And anyway, when the time runs out, forget it. Kill it off. Next generation: Prozac, Lustril, Xeroxat, paroxetine, fluoxetine, serotonin reuptake inhibitor drugs. They're over. You know, the money's gone. The 15 years is up. So now we move on to the serotonin and noradrenaline reuptake inhibitor. Very dirty drug. Cymbalta is one. You know, Effexor is another. They don't work better. They're almost certainly more toxic. But that's the way the drug industry works. And 10 years ago, the head of GlaxoSmithKline, Britain's biggest, dirtiest drug company, fined billions of dollars in China. China's very interesting because they are not under the control of the big pharma cartel in the same way that the rest of the world is. So GSK did their normal thing, which Bill Gates is also doing right now, which is he went into China with $1 billion to give away. And they went around bribing all the health officials and the head of the medicine this and et cetera, to pave the way for getting their business going, which is exactly what's happening now with the vaccine makers. Lots of bribes. And anyway, they got busted and fined $2 billion in China. And GSK got busted in America and fined over $5 billion. They've been fined $13 billion, but not in Britain, because they're our largest taxpayer. That's the way it goes. So the drug industry is dependent on the next blockbuster. And about 10 years ago, the head of GSK said, we can't make money, we have no more blockbusters. We have to move into vaccines. The future is vaccines. That's the reality. The whole pharmaceutical industry, to maintain its profit base now, has to move into vaccines. I'm not anti-vaccines, but I'm anti-bad medicine and I'm anti-profiteering. And we have to apply the same standard of safety checks and proper medicine to vaccines as we do to any other drug or nutrient. Anyway, what happens is when you have a SSRI, you get, in placebo-controlled trials, you get about a 65% drop in the Hamilton rating scale. The placebo is a 50% drop. So the difference is a 15% drop. And a 15% drop is the difference to answering yes or no differently to 3 questions on the Hamilton rating scale. And in a lot of these trials, if you've ever taken an antidepressant, you notice dreams go a bit weird, or you sweat, or strange things happen. And you think, do you know, I think I'm on the drug. And then not the placebo. And then when you get the question, I go, well, actually, I think my mood is a bit better, you know. Or I think I am a little bit less anxious. Just 3 question changes. And if you do this on a large enough scale, you get the statistical significance. So now there have been 7 studies that have used enhanced placebo, where the placebo induces the same type of side effects. And there is no difference. So antidepressants actually have a very small effect. I touched on this earlier. And also, there have been downright straightforward lies. So one of the big studies that was used to be able to prescribe antidepressants to children got reanalyzed. And this happened when GSK got fined $3 billion. They had to disclose their data. And when the actual data was reanalyzed, it was found that there was no improvement, and there was actually an increase in harm. And that was the study that was used to allow these antidepressants to be prescribed to teenagers. So serotonin is associated with mood, sleep patterns, dreaming, and visions. And if you're low in serotonin, you may be depressed, anxious, you may have more PMS, you may rather eat chocolate than have sex, you may want to drink, and you may become more emotionally volatile. So burst into tears, burst of anger, become a bit obsessive, think about suicide. That's kind of what happens. Here is a study feeding rats tryptophan. And then measuring in the cerebrospinal fluid, which encases the brain, an increase in 5-HTP and an increase in serotonin over the next 12 hours. So there's no question that if you take in these amino acids, they change your brain's chemistry within a matter of hours. And if you look at studies comparing 5-HTP to placebo, these are the percentage improvements. I said antidepressants were 15% better than placebo. And this is the percentage on the 5-HTP studies on the Hamilton rating scale. Same measure, same everything, better. Fraction of the side effects. This was a recent conclusion in one of the pharmaceutical journals. It raises serotonin levels in the brain. Most studies are positive. Even in combination with antidepressants, nutritionists are taught not to give 5-HTP with antidepressants. The antidepressants block the reuptake inhibitor and the 5-HTP makes more, but actually it's probably not an issue. And there are some pharma companies that are looking to combine 5-HTP with antidepressants to enhance their effect. The serotonin syndrome has never occurred with 5-HTP. Some people get a little nausea or stomach cramps with 5-HTP in high doses, which generally is eliminated with an enteric-coated 5-HTP. We make 70% of our serotonin in the gut. So for an antidepressant effect, you need at least 100 milligrams, probably 300 milligrams. Best taken on an empty stomach, maybe a little carbohydrate. Release of insulin actually helps it get into the brain. And if someone is nauseous, just lower the dose and then take it. It usually goes away after a few days. But not everyone needs 5-HTP. I don't take 5-HTP. So if someone took 5-HTP and became more hyper or anxious, they don't need it. Their serotonin is probably fine. So we've learned blood sugar, chromium, 5-HTP. Vitamin D improves mood. The lower your vitamin D, the worse your mood. Supplementing vitamin D improves mood. We're all deficient in winter. We all need to supplement. Probably 1,000 I use, maybe even more. It's linked to better memory and less cancer risk. And the best way is to get sunlight exposure. But we are all designed to be naked and living outdoors, but a lot further south than Copenhagen. So yeah, you could go on the nudist beach in the summer, but it's not going to do you any good in the winter. So you either go on holiday in the south, or you increase your vitamin D. Here's a study, came out yesterday. I get studies every day. I mean, I'm reading, dozens of studies every week. Vitamin D deficiency below 20 nanograms per mil, which is 50 nanomoles per liter. How do you measure vitamin D in Denmark? Is it nanograms per mil or is it nanomoles per liter? Nanomole per liter. Yeah, okay. So 50. Below 50 occurred in 46% of women. This is pregnant women. And every 10 increase or 25 nanomoles per liter increase is associated with a greater than 1 point increase in IQ. So the higher your vitamin D, the higher the IQ of the baby, that is, right? Of the child, not the mother, although probably the mother as well. Exercise works better than drugs. So getting outdoors exercising is really good. Bright light, so studies with light therapy is superior to placebo and antidepressants. So there's lots of things that we can do. This is a World Health Organization data on seafood intake and depression. Again, there is a correlation. The more seafood, the less depression. These were 3 of the early studies using the Hamilton rating scale, showing the improvement, the difference between the omega and the placebo. So again, much bigger than antidepressants. I showed you earlier the meta-analysis in the journal Public Library of Sciences, 1+1, very good open access journal. And, we already know that these things work. So we've got a lot of handle on depression. But as I said, it's not all nutrition. So I always ask, are you betraying yourself? Are you living your life true to who you really are or really believe in? So if you have a crap job that's got nothing to do with what you believe in or a crap relationship and it really is not working, You know, all the omega-3 isn't going to sort that out. So, but I'm here to talk about the nutrition, not the psychology. We've already learned that the omega-3 is important. But you probably won't get enough from chia and flax because the conversion is so low. And when you look at the level of omega-3 in fish, and specifically, well, you know, most omega-3 is kind of 50-50 EPA-DHA. So we don't have to worry too much. It's always got both. The EPA seems to work a bit better for depression, while the DHA seems to work better for memory cognition. But, you know, we're looking at the ones that have higher levels: herring, smoked salmon, you know, fresh mackerel, canned sardines. And I also look at the omega-3 to mercury ratio. See, if you have fresh tuna, it's got 1.5 grams of omega-3 per 100 grams, and canned tuna is 0.37. So where did it all go? And the answer is it went off to the omega-3 companies. They squeeze the oil out. They make more money by squeezing the oil out, selling it to the omega-3 industry, and now you have a dry tuna rather than oily tuna, so you've got to put it in oil, right? So you put in olive oil or whatever, and then you sell it. And there's a lot of oil in the head and the tail. In the summer, I live on a little island in Kenya. I'll be going there in a few weeks. A little fishing village where we have tuna. Never more than €3 a kilo. So much tuna. And it's the yellowfin tuna, which is smaller. And has very little mercury either. Most of the mercury in the ocean, I mean, yes, we have pollution, but most of the mercury in the ocean is coming from fissures in the ocean floor, undersea volcanoes. So if you have somewhere in the Pacific that is very active like that, you have a lot more mercury in the water, much less, you know, in the Indian Ocean. And yeah, so this is real tuna with real oil. It's not a problem. You won't get lots of mercury, but you will if you have, you know, canned tuna. And so things like herring, it's very good. Canned sardine is the whole sardine. It's the whole fish. So it's good. Smoked salmon is not burnt. It's like raw salmon, but you know, it's slow cook. It's fine. It's good. If you choose one seed, it's the chia seed because it has the antioxidants and the protein and the magnesium and the soluble fiber. So I love the other seeds, and I used to have a jar that mixed them all, etc. That's great. It's fine. But chia does it all, you know. So I have a spoonful of chia every day. So I want to eat more oily fish, especially the ones with teeth. Chia, flax, pumpkin, supplement omega-3. If I have a client with depression, I may give them extra omega-3, aiming for 1,000 milligram of EPA. And if I have memory problems, I want to give extra, but for DHA, but I will explain that. So if someone said to me, I'm depressed, tell me what to do in 30 seconds, I would say, get outdoors and exercise. Brisk walk, run. Why? Sunlight improves your mood, raises serotonin, makes vitamin D. Exercise improves your mood. I would say eat a low glycemic load diet. Don't be gobbling lots of sugar and carbs. And I would say in England, I'd say supplement mood food, because mood food contains chromium, 5-HTP, tyrosine, all these B vitamins. These are the homocysteine methylating nutrients. I would say supplement this and omega-3. Gives you everything in bold. And eat fish 3 times a week. And then you've covered a lot of bases that will help depression. What about insomnia? There are 2 reasons why people don't sleep well. One is they can't get to sleep because they can't turn off adrenaline. Their mind is too active. They have too much fear. I saw a T-shirt the other day that said, everything you want is the other side of fear. And I love the book by Jerry Jampolsky, Love is Letting Go of Fear. And for our philosophical thought for the morning, I love the quote by Rupert Spira, which says, love is the proof that consciousness is shared. You might have to absorb that one. So we have to turn off the adrenal response and go from what are called beta waves in the brain into alpha waves to go to sleep. The other reason why people don't sleep is they don't have enough melatonin, which is made from serotonin, which is made from tryptophan. Sleep is a major problem. It causes, significant harm. A study at the National Institute of Health found that the newer drugs, the non-benzodiazepines like Ambien, made you fall asleep approximately 12.8 minutes faster than a fake pill and sleep for just 11 minutes longer. So that's our best sleeping pills. The combination of GABA, which is an amino acid, a lot of these things that work are illegal, and probably here, as in the UK. But you can buy GABA. If you have a drink, your GABA goes up. If you smoke a joint, your GABA goes up. If you walk along the beach on a nice sunny day, your GABA goes up. GABA, gamma-aminobutyric acid, is a single amino acid that is also a neurotransmitter that switches off adrenaline. And if you take 1,000 milligram of GABA, it's just like having a glass of wine without the drunk. You just chill. The problem with alcohol is that after about an hour, hour and a half, your GABA goes up and then it goes down. So you have to have another one, and then another one. And then you have to go to sleep under the influence of the alcohol. And then you wake up with low GABA, which means high anxiety. But GABA works. And if you combine GABA, which switches off adrenaline, with 5-HTP that promotes serotonin, in a placebo-controlled trial, cut the time taken to fall asleep from 32 minutes to 19 minutes and extended sleep from 5 to almost 7 hours. So that's way more effective. So you can supplement 5-HTP, and that will raise melatonin, and in which case you want to do it an hour or half an hour before bed. And this is particularly for people who wake up at 3 in the morning, or, they can't maintain deep sleep through the night. You can take melatonin, which is a naturally occurring neurotransmitter. So doctors can prescribe melatonin. In America, you can buy it over the counter, which means you can buy it online for your own use, legally. But I think probably in Denmark, you can't buy melatonin. You can. Fantastic. Good. Okay. We can't. Not in England, yeah. Then there is a very good composer called John Levine who has composed music that switch your brain into alpha. And it's called Silence of Peace, and you can download it digitally. So I woke up in the early hours of this morning, and I just press on my phone, Silence of Peace, the music plays, and the next thing I know, I've fallen back to sleep. So it's very, very good, Silence of Peace. And so many good reports on that. Magnesium also is calming. GABA also is calming. So it's a combination of these that help. GABA is made from taurine and glutamine, and 5-HTP is made from tryptophan. Coffee is more stimulating than tea. I mean, if your friend is upset, you say, come round and we'll have a nice cup of tea and talk about it. You don't say, come round and we'll have a nice double espresso and talk about it. So what is it that makes tea more calming but stimulating than coffee? And the answer is theanine. Tea is rich in theanine, which is a calming amino acid. So I don't know what supplements you have here, but it's these kind of combinations that are going to help. Theanine helps your mood. It's safe. It has multiple effects on depression, anxiety, sleep disturbance, and cognitive impairment with depression. Not as strong as GABA and 5-HTP. Those are really the most powerful. And then there are some herbs like passion flower and hops and valerian. Since valerian potentiates sedative drugs, including muscle relaxants and antihistamines, don't take it if you are prescribed medication without your doctor's consent. Those kind of things. So valerian and alcohol also is probably a slightly dangerous combination. And valerian is so soporific, you don't want to be driving a car under the influence of valerian. But if you really are stressed out and need to just switch off, absolutely, valerian is fantastic. I won't play you this for too long, because if I do, we'll all just go to sleep. But it's, you just put it very, very quietly on the background. But really, really good reports, etc. Strongly recommend it. So solutions for stress. 1 in 5 people take time off because of it. 59% say life is more stressful than 5 years ago. Your risk for a heart attack or heart disease goes up 5 times. Diabetes, obesity, and dementia risk more than doubles. It's as bad for you as smoking or having a high cholesterol. I don't know, I've been dreaming of Hamlet. When I was coming to Denmark, I kept dreaming of Hamlet. So here we have another quote from Hamlet. There is nothing either good or bad, but thinking that makes it so. So, it's how we perceive things. So we have these adrenal triggers, the fight-flight syndrome. It used to be about hunting and survival, and we would have one wife and we would have one job. And, nowadays we have stressful thoughts, blood sugar dips, caffeine, failing relationships, job change, non-stop mental activity, COVID, lockdown, furlough, this, etc. So there's so much going on that's causing this endless adrenal trigger. 21st century living is a source of stress. We have 42% of marriages end in divorce. Most people change jobs every 4 years. Most people check emails on holiday. 1 in 5 young Americans admitted to checking their smartphone during sex. Sugar consumption has increased from 0 to 50 grams per person per year. Caffeine consumption averages 3 cups per person per day. Postmenopausal progesterone deficiency promotes adrenal hormones. I'll tell you more about that. There's a very good book to read by Professor Robert Lustig called The Hacking of the American Mind. And what he's talking about is the reward system of the brain, which hinges on dopamine. The marketeers have learnt how to get you hooked. And maybe you've seen on Netflix The Social Dilemma, talking about the effects of digital technology. Things like the like button that get you hooked. What you want is you don't know if you're going to get a like or a not like. It's like the slot machine. If you went into the gambling hall and you gave them, your 1,000 krona and say, I'm going to go off and have a cup of tea and then I'll come back in, just give me what I've won. It wouldn't have the same effect. But if you put, each coin in the machine and you pull the lever and you wait and the wait, we're like, oh, I haven't. And then I haven't. And then I have. And then I haven't. I nearly did, etc. It's that that gets you hooked. So the marketeers have learned how they want to control every second of they want your time. And they've succeeded in getting your time. And if you are here, and even the thought of turning your phone off, right? Not just on silent, but actually off. You say, just for today, I turn my phone off, right? And if you can, because even you've got it on quiet or on your pocket, a little vibration, you want the ping. And you go, I'll have a little look, Facebook, WhatsApp, what's happening, they've got your time. It's all based on this. Here is a study where in the first part of the study, they exposed volunteers to an unpleasant electric shock and said, how much will you pay to not have this? And they say, yeah, I'll pay 50 krona, whatever it is. Then they were left alone with their thoughts for 15 minutes in a room, no stimulation, just them. And there was a button that they could press to give themselves an electric shock, which was unpleasant, which they'd already agreed they would pay to not have. And 12 out of 18 men and 6 out of 24 women gave themselves up to 4 electric shocks. 2/3 of men pressed the button. 1 man gave himself 190 shocks to relieve the boredom. What is striking is simply being alone with their thoughts was apparently so aversive that it drove many participants to self-administer an electric shock that they had previously said they would pay to avoid. So we're trying to sell mindfulness. People are terrified. Of course, it's more like mindlessness, just to be there with your thoughts and nothing else, is terribly scary for most people. We're being trained to just every second press a button, do something. That's kind of how we are getting hooked. And it's actually affecting our brain structure and function. There are 4 ways to raise adrenal hormones. 1 is with a stressful thought. 2 is with a blood sugar dip, triggers adrenaline. 3 is with caffeine and other stimulant drugs like nicotine. And the 4th is with progesterone deficiency, which occurs in postmenopausal women. So, how much does this weigh? half a glass of water. How much does it weigh? I'm asking you. How much does it weigh? 200 grams, 100 grams? The answer is, it depends how long I hold it. Right? The longer I hold it, the heavier it gets. And that's the point. Stress is great. It stimulates you. You want challenges. That's the first phase here. So, stress. I arrived at the airport, got out my passport. Already I'd had to have the COVID test and all that stuff, right? And the guy says, "Who is Gabby Holford?" I said, "Well, that's my wife." I had my wife's passport. Thus began an exchange of information, including my systematic review and meta-analysis of COVID studies, and my card that says Professor Patrick Holford, and my letter from the wonderful May Day inviting me to teach and all the rest of it. And eventually they contacted the Danish customs people, and they said, "Okay, we'll let him in without his passport." So a certain amount of stress can actually be stimulating. And if that continues for a period of time, you can actually function at quite a high level. But if it continues, you come into the hyperreactive stage where you start losing your temper and just, flipping and becoming very, very hyperactive. And if it continues, you end up in the emotional exhaustion stage where you just can't cope with anything. So that's it. So, which stage are you in? In the first stage, you're stress-free, you have good energy, you have good concentration, you have a normal level or a high level, if you like, of DHEA, the sort of good stress hormone, and your cortisol. The adrenal glands produce adrenaline, short-acting fast, within 0.2 of a second, and then long-acting is cortisol. So you have a normal cortisol level. In stage 1, slightly prolonged stress, these should both be high. It's wrong. But your cortisol is raised because you are stressed. In stage 2, prolonged stress, you've still got high cortisol, meaning you're stressed, but your DHEA level is starting to go down. You're losing your adaptive capacity. You feel tired, stressed out, anxious, poor concentration, disturbed sleep. And eventually, in stage 3, chronic stress, you can't cope, you've got chronic fatigue, you can't think straight, you're always tired, your DHEA level is low, and your cortisol is low. You can no longer respond. You're burnt out, and you can measure these things. The Heart Math Institute have done fantastic research, which shows that the heart and the limbic brain, the adrenal system in the brain, are connected with neurons. And there are a lot more connections that go from the heart to the brain than from the brain to the heart. And ultimately what this means is if you want to turn off a stress reaction, you have to change your feeling as opposed to your thinking. And you can measure this. If I plug into my phone, this little device here cost me about £120, I think, and I plug it into my phone, I clip it on my ear, I instantly can measure what's called my heart rate variability. It's not my pulse. So these two people both have the same heart rate of about 70 beats a minute, but a very different pattern between the heartbeats. And this is called your heart rate variability. This is a state of frustration or chaos. This is a state of appreciation. That's what actually measures your stress state. And even now, just for 1 second, just very briefly, just even close your eyes, just for 1 minute, and bring your attention to the area of your heart. Bring your awareness to the space in the middle of your chest. And imagine that you are breathing into this space, into your heart space. You inhale into the heart space. And you exhale out from the heart space. Allow your breathing to become a little slower and a little deeper. Breathing into the heart space and out from the heart space. It's good that your inhale and exhale is of equal length. You may even just count 5 beats in, 5 beats out. Breathing into the heart space and out from the heart space. Now, as you continue to breathe into the heart space and out from the heart space, make a sincere attempt to experience a regenerative feeling. It might be someone that you love, or a special place, or a wonderful memory, a wonderful experience. As you breathe into the heart space, evoke something that makes you feel good. And bring your attention back to the room. And keep breathing into the heart space, absolutely fine. But we just did, in a lightning short period of time, 2 exercises from the Heart Math Institute called Quick Coherence. Breathing in and out of the heart space and evoking a positive memory. And you can measure this. And what happens is you're trying to get into the green. So on my phone, I have an app. It's called Inner Balance. You can download the app for free, but you still need the device. And you're trying to get out of the red and into the green. And you can learn very quickly how to get into the green. And interestingly, you can even, you bring to mind someone you love, and then you go, oh, that bastard, and you'll see in the chart that you're in the green, then you go into the red. I sometimes wire myself up when I do my emails in the morning, and I can see what I react to. And, it's a wonderful, wonderful app, and it shows you exactly what's going, but you're entraining yourself, ideally 5 minutes twice a day. So if you can't get to sleep, you could do it before you go to sleep. I tell you this for your clients, because I have clients who panic. My mother-in-law, for example, she panics about her high blood pressure. She goes to the doctor, and she's sitting there, and it puts up her blood pressure. So I lent her this, and I've taught her to clip on while she's waiting to see the doctor. And she breathes into the heart space, and she brings to mind her grandchild. And she gets into the green, goes in, does the blood pressure, absolutely fine. Absolutely fine. So heart math is very good. I'm sure there's a Danish representative of heart math. And you can do a 3-day training. And if you're a nutritionist, I would recommend doing this definitely, because it's such a good, clear technique. And it raises DHA and lowers cortisol. Another string to your bow. So the stimulants, when you have chocolate, you're actually getting theobromine, caffeine and theophylline. Chocolate is mainly theobromine, and coffee is mainly caffeine. Coffee does give you all 3. So that's chocolate and that's coffee big time. And they stimulate dopamine, which then makes noradrenaline and adrenaline. And noradrenaline is kind of the feel-good stimulation. So like if you're in love, you'll make more noradrenaline. But if you're in fear, you'll make more adrenaline. And what happens is the more often you are making these neurotransmitters, just like our insulin receptors become insulin resistant when you make too much insulin because you have too many carbs. If you have too much adrenaline, noradrenaline, dopamine, your brain starts to shut down the receptors and you become resistant. And therefore in the morning, normally the light should come up and you're wide awake. For me, the light comes up, I'm wide awake, within a minute, or straight away, and I get up and I go and write a chapter. But for most people, they don't know this. They wake up sleepy, groggy, and they head on remote control to the kettle and make a strong cup of tea or coffee or light up a cigarette or have some toast with some sugar jam on it, and gradually they come to life. But we should have that, and that means that they've become resistant to their stimulating neurotransmitters. If you quit those substances, you feel flat for a few days, and then you start to regain your sensitivity. And then when you have the double espresso that you had before, you're completely wired because your system is more sensitive. And that's why the most heroin deaths occur when someone is detoxed, cleaned up, and then takes the same dose that they had before, which is now twice as strong because they've now opened up their receptors. So, we start off suboptimally nourished. We then learn to use stimulants to give us more energy. We then start to overuse stimulants with more cigarettes, more coffee, more alcohol, etc. And then if you remove them, you're completely exhausted and flat, can't function. But gradually, through withdrawal, you regain your sensitivity. And that's where most people are at. Yep, so caffeine is a major issue. And, so often with my clients, I'm doing a little inventory. There's caffeine in green tea, and there's caffeine in chocolate, and there's caffeine in Red Bull, and there's caffeine in Diet Coke, and all the rest of it. And in case you don't know, I think it was an alcoholic, not a heroin addict, but I think it was an alcoholic. But a guy made this drink that managed to keep him off the alcohol. And it contained sugar, and it contained cocaine, and various ingredients. And that was Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola was this doctor's attempt to cure himself from his addiction. It didn't quite work, and I think he ended up selling it for like under $100 and then dying himself, But that was the purpose. So yes, more and more coffee. Here's a study in Canada where if you have a coffee and a croissant, so coffee and carbs, it triples your blood sugar effect. So in essence, what we've learned is the 5 addictive foods are caffeine, think coffee, sugar, chocolate, which is probably the least bad, and gluten, which contains or creates gluteomorphines, so it has a slight opioid effect, and milk, the caseomorphines. Why is milk addictive? Because you want the infant to latch onto the breast. You want them to be addicted to breast milk. It's a fundamental function. So when you go into Starbucks or whatever is your coffee shop and you have the chocomoccacino with the chocolate chip cookie or the pain au chocolat, and you're basically getting wheat, milk, chocolate, sugar, caffeine. It's like breastfeeding. It's like food heroin. And every now and again, so what? It's rather lovely. But if that's how you start your day, you're in a bad way. Now, some people get panic attacks. And one of the quickest ways to turn off a panic attack is to run a basin of water. I don't think it has to be cold, but let's say cold water. Take a big gulp, stick your head underwater, and hold your breath for as long as possible without, strain, really. And we have a natural diving reflex, which turns the adrenal system off. It's part of the diving reflex. You know that if you put a baby into water at 6 months old, they will naturally go underwater, stop breathing, float to the surface, take a gulp of air. We have a diving reflex. It's part of our Homo aquaticus past. And it switches off adrenaline. That's why people free dive. They do this. They go underwater and they hold their breath for a very long period of time and they report euphoria. So whenever I arrive at a place with a swimming pool or the ocean, I dive in and I swim underwater. And this sort of calm takes over. Now, of course, if you're having a panic attack on a train, it's a little bit difficult. But there are some ways of breathing. You may have heard of the Buteyko method of breathing, which is very good for all sorts of things, from asthma to snoring and also to panic attacks. So there are ways of breathing, even just to hold your breath for 10 seconds between each breath in and your breath out, can actually help to switch off an adrenal reaction. Breathing into the heart space. If you're really having a panic attack, you could breathe into the heart space, but you probably wouldn't be able to evoke a positive feeling, It's like meditation is fantastic, but it ain't going to work when you're having a panic attack, So you have different strokes at different times. Sometimes what we do is to rub natural bioidentical progesterone onto thin skin, like the inner arm. And after about 10 minutes, it actually switches off the adrenal response. Yes, progesterone dampens down the adrenal response. And we think that's why a lot of women postmenopausally, when the progesterone drops right off, are more wired, are having more over-adrenaline type reactions, more panicky, more anxious, more aggressive, more flushes, more tense muscles, more peeing, often called cystitis, but not really cystitis. So the background, eat a low-GL diet, avoid adrenal stimulants, get a good night's sleep, exercise, deal with underlying causes of stress and unresolved issues. I tell you a story. On my retreats in the Black Mountains of Wales, we've built this amazing place, 16th century barn with 1,000-year-old oak and all the rest of it. And I have people who come there. I have a 3-day course called Total Health Transformation. And we learn many things. But also, it's a whole sort of mind-body map, because we've got 3 fundamental instincts. One is the instinct of conservation or survival, which is our being. And it's in the belly. It's your being. It's your direct experience of life. And the other is in the heart, which is your relating. So this is asking, how am I? Am I hot? Am I cold? Am I safe? Am I hungry? And this is asking, who am I with? Hey, I like these people. I don't like those people. I'll vote for them. This is my football team. Relational. Who are my people? And then the third instinct is what's happening? What's going on? What time is it? When's the break, and how's the traffic, and all that sort of stuff. And out of those come 3 fears. This is the fear of not being, which is the fear of death, and this is the fear of not being loved and appreciated, not having a place, in your social group, and this is the fear of losing your mind, going crazy, or dementia. So when people arrive on my retreats, I know that they have these fears, that their arthritis is going to get worse and worse and worse. This is going to get worse and worse and worse. So anyway, we do exercise. Like on the first day, all the meditation stuff we do on the first day is mainly from the sort of Eastern Taoist traditions, but of generating vital energy, getting very centered in this hara or tantien or the kath, in the ground, And then people start to feel really calm and grounded. And the next day we learn heart math, which is a heart-centered thing, and so on. Anyway, the reason I tell you this is so, one lady, she comes on the course, she has chronic insomnia. I say, have you tried 5-HTP? Yes. Magnesium? Yes. Have you tried silence of peace? Yes. Have you tried GABA? Yes. Have you tried melatonin? Yes. What's the blood sugar like? I eat a very good, she tried everything. And she has chronic insomnia. And then we do one exercise, which comes from the Hoffman process, which is one of the best pieces of work. It's a 7-day intensive course for busting negative emotional patterns. So I do one exercise out of that, which takes you back to a very early experience of some pattern. And anyway, she gets back to this moment where she was abandoned by her mother, who had to go to work, and she's very young, 4 or something. And she's got to look after her younger brother, who is 2. And there's someone knocking on the door, and they're hiding. She's hiding under a table, alone, etc. And she realized in that moment, going to sleep is not safe. And that was the key. So anyway, I just tell you that. It's not all about nutrition. So as a wrap-up of this section, stress, caffeine, and sugar creates adrenaline, fast-acting, cortisol, long-acting, switches off melatonin. Coffee switches off melatonin for 10 hours. Do not have coffee after midday, caffeine. Benzodiazepines switch off adrenaline. They're all based on mimicking GABA. GABA is the best if you can buy it. If not, it's made from glutamine and taurine, and theanine help. Adrenaline is made from tyrosine. Tyrosine helps to support your adrenal function. Cortisol is made from cholesterol via progesterone. Progesterone gives you capacity. And there are all sorts of nutrients that are required, which I'll explain more of. And tryptophan or 5-HTP make melatonin. Somewhere in there, is the issue. And that brings us to our first break. Are you doing good? Yes. Okay, thank you.